Thank you. So sorry for the delay to the members of the public, but we should still be able to finish everything on the agenda by the allotted time. We can quickly go ahead and give introductions by all the board members. I'm Melanie Ochoa, she, her pronouns. I'm with the ACLU of Southern California, and I'll pass it over to Pastor Kennedy.
Brian Kennedy, I pastor at Mount Zion Church of Ontario, and let's see, Majani.
Hi, this is
Manju.
Manju. Yeah, and apologies, I'm having some issues with my internet today, so I'm going to go off camera. Manju Kulkarni, I am Executive Director of API Equity Alliance in Los Angeles and co-founder of Stop API Hate, and glad to be joining this subcommittee for the first time. I can't see the others, unfortunately, so Melanie, if you could pick the next person.
Yeah, no worries. And thank you for joining. We're happy to have you on this committee as well. Ronnie, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name's Ronaldo Villada. He, his pronouns. I'm the Executive Director of Hoops for Justice.
Great, thank you. And let's go quickly forward to approve the subcommittee minutes. I think if I remember the rules correctly, Manju can vote if she would like to, but she could also abstain if she would like to as well. And I will move to approve the minutes if we have a second.
Second.
Okay, and we can vote. Maybe it's faster just to do it vocally. Melanie Ochoa, aye.
Ronaldo Villada, aye.
Brian Kennedy, aye.
Manju Kulkarni, I abstain.
Okay, thank you. And we'll jump into the overview by the DOJ.
Very good. Good morning, everyone. My name is Aisha Martin Walton. I'm with the California Department of Justice. And just to give you a brief overview for the second meeting of the post subcommittee, this is where the subcommittee members will go over the first draft for your review. And the DOJ, of course, is happy to and anxious to get your feedback on this draft. And so that is where you will be discussing it in agenda number 5. However, as part of this presentation, we'd like to ask RIPA board member Angela Sierra to provide a brief summary of her presentation before the post commission at their first meeting of the year. And she discussed some of the work of the RIPA board. So member Angela, are you on the call?
Aisha, I don't see her back yet, so I will send her a message, but
Okay.
I don't see her back on yet.
All right. So with that, the other item that we have under DOJ update is to we've invited Post to give an update on the dispatch training and the Museum of Tolerance training. As well, one of the items that they are going to be sharing with you is an overview of the field training officer program. And that's an extension of the academy courses. And it has a racial and identity profiling feature. And while it is not going to be covered in this year's report, because it is an extensive program, it is something that the task force subcommittee, the subcommittee has been interested in learning about and getting a preview. So that may be something that you hear from Post over the next couple of meetings. So let's see. I think that is it. Allison, should we come back to Angela when we are able to, when she pops in?
Yes, I think that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, everyone,
Okay.
with the time change. I think Angela was on earlier, so hopefully we'll get her back soon.
Right. So with that, The next item on the agenda is hearing from Post. And again, I believe we should have a representative from Post who will give you an update on MOT, the racial and identity profiling curriculum update, Train the Trainer program, and the dispatch training, which both of them have huge impacts and components on the expanded racial and identity profiling courses. And then also in this item, and I'm raising this because co-chairs Vieta and Ochoa, the field training program is also part of this agenda item, and you're welcome to have it presented now or perhaps a little bit later in the meeting, but it's your choice. So with that, I will like to turn it back over to you, Member Ochoa.
Great, thank you, Aisha. And we'll just hand off to whoever was from Post, who's joining us from Post today to give this presentation.
Good morning, Megan Polis here from Post, and I'll just be giving a brief update on the two programs that Aisha mentioned. The Museum of Tolerance, we actually heard from them just this morning with an update on the racial profiling Train the Trainer course, that they have completed all of the revisions and have done a test run with veteran instructors. They informed us that they will be submitting their final revisions and their updated course outline to Post for certification, hopefully in the next week or so, just so that all the members are aware. They cannot present the course until it's certified by Post. So there are no presentations that are currently being run at this time until those revisions come through. And then on the dispatch side, we are scheduled to present those new the new updates to that program at our commission meeting on June 7th. And then at that time, those changes will be available to the public for feedback. So I don't know if there's any questions for me on those two components.
Thank you for that, Megan. Just so I can be clear, the new updates are presented on June 7th to the Post Commission for comments. What's the timeline for receiving comments?
That I'm not sure of.
And what's the next step after that, after the comments are received?
That I'm not aware of either. I think it's just kind of going to depend on what the commission has for feedback for us.
Did anyone else have any questions on those two items? And are you going to do a discussion of the field training as well?
So I have consultant Stephen Crawford on with me. He oversees the field training program here at Post and is the true expert in the program. So I'm going to let him do that discussion.
And before you hop off, Megan, I know that we had some questions that related to Post that kind of came out of the report. And are you able to stay on after we've done the overview of the report so we can ask follow-up questions?
Absolutely. I'll be here for the duration of the meeting.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you for joining us too, Stephen, and we're ready to hear what you have to say.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Good morning, Chair, Co-Chair, Advisory Board. My name is Stephen Crawford. I am assigned to the Basic Training Bureau, excuse me, at Post. My primary responsibility duty is to oversee the field training program for the state. It's not limited to, but includes course approval. This oversees the curriculum development and the program approval for all agencies within the state. Right now we have, there's 549 agencies within the state that have what we call a post-approved program, which means they fall under the regulatory umbrella of Post. I work with all the current presenters, all the future presenters to keep their courses current, acclimate them to changes as to regulation. And I also am the course approver, so I approve those courses. There's a component of the program, the field training program. That program is the core component of what follows the academy. So we like to refer to it as part 2 of the academy. It's a continuation of the learning process, and it should be an academic congruency of what they're receiving in the academies throughout the state. There's two portions of the program. There's volume one, which is the administrative portion that forms the what we call the standardized evaluation guidelines, which equate to nothing more than core competencies that are directly related to the learning domains, and which is created from the job task analysis. From there, there's the volume two, which is the validation portion. This portion is paramount in the field training program, because a lot of the program is predicated upon on-the-job training. And this is where trainees or new hires demonstrate proficiency once they're in the field. The third part of that is courses. There's 3 courses within the field program. There's the basic course, 40 hours long. There's the update course, which is 24 hours long, and it's mandated every 3 years. And then there's the supervisor administrative course. It's for, obviously, as stated, it's for supervisors who now are running the course, coordinating the course, ever which the department demands. And that one is the 24-hour course. Related to the racial profiling, it's covered in LD 42. There's 16 hours in the regular basic course, what we call, is commonly referred to as the academy. But in the regular basic course, if you take the 6 to 8 month course that the trainees typically take, there's within the minimal components, there's 16 hours identified for cultural diversity, and that's where the component of racial identity is put there. If a person, not to get too far off the track, but if a person takes a modular program, they're introduced the same 16 hours at different variations of the modular program. Within section 6 of volume 2, which is the core competencies, we have an entire chapter that's dedicated to racial profiling. It's specifically, it's racial profiling prohibited and damaging upon the community, profiling behavior, constitutional amendments, community history, agency policy, focusing on behavior, and citizen support. From there, and I'd like to say, have specific segments that are identified through this. Within the 42 learning domains that are presented within the academy, you could probably loosely tie about 20 of these to the overall construct of racial profiling, in the sense that it falls under professionalism, leadership, constitutional laws, state laws, federal laws, etc. And from there, basically, I just coordinate every problems or issues or anybody has in this state. Is there anything that I may answer from anybody about? I know it's a very, very, I say it's academically heavy, but it's not. It's academically intense in the way the programs are set up, and it's very, there's a lot of paperwork, and so I try to stick to the bullet points. But within a construct of that, is there anything that I can offer to kind of break it down to work into more of the layperson, how it works from our perspective?
Thank you for that, Stephen. And I know a lot of this has been explained to me multiple times, but I'm always having a hard time following along. So thank you for that. And just as put a pin in that for our report, I think it would actually be really helpful if we can lay out kind of what those steps in the training are, so that we know kind of where things fit in. So if you, I don't know if our DOJ folks already have that breakdown, or if you could provide that to them again, if they don't already have that. I think that'd be helpful just to have that somewhere early in our report, so that the public reading it knows where these.
I understand, so they can see. Yeah, so they can see how it looks on paper and get a visual. Yes, sir.
And so just following up on how you were describing like volume, so please correct me if I'm misunderstanding any of these things. I just want to make sure it's properly in my head. You said volume 1 is the guidelines. Is that the basically the LD and maybe Aisha can help me too with the correct language, but is that the kind of the thing that we were provided earlier that we've um commented on previously that's part of the academy class, or is that something different?
So what you, I believe what you're referring to is you're referring to the learning domains that are provided to the students within the academies. And there's currently 42 of those.
Mhm.
So the way it works to keep it consistent is the field training program is a carryover from the LDs in the academy. So case in point, let's say that someone has taught something on about leadership or ethics or specifically about constitutional law. As they go to the departments, it's not a brain dump, or it shouldn't be. You're going to have the tie-in of departments' policies and procedures, and then there's going to be a portion where it has to be demonstrated to show proficiency in the field. So that could be very simple as making a traffic stop, for example. There's constitutional issues there. There's state law. There's federal law, professionalism, ethics. And then as with everything, there's going to come down to department, agency policies and procedures. So what you're talking about, ma'am, is the learning domains. Volume 1 is where the state has taken it and said, look, from our perspective, as a best practice from what we learned, and in a nutshell, the field training program has been around in existence since the early 70s. It's gone through a multitude of variations and iterations. And so where we're at today is what we consider the best practice. So the state post, we provide big guidelines for agencies to follow. So we can tell them, hey, if you stay within these guidelines, you're going to be congruent and you're going to match and mirror the information that's presented in the learning domains through the testing and testing component of the academies. And so there should be a direct correlation. And in other words, they're not presented one thing in the academy and expected to do another thing in the field. It doesn't make sense. So there's a pretty good correlation there. And the departments have the ability to replicate this or have them demonstrate it really as many times as they want until they feel comfortable with their performance.
And so when you said, so just to make sure, you said earlier about volume 1 is guidelines, volume 2 is core competencies. Are then
Yes, ma'am.
volume 1 and volume 2 both within the LD piece? Are you saying volume 1 is essentially the LD and then volume 2 is essentially training?
So I would
Training.
say,
Okay.
to keep it really simple, neither one of them are within the LD piece. They're
Mhm.
all segments. They're all pillars of the framework of the house, right? So the learning domains would be the base. Volume 1 would be like a corner, and volume 2 would be a corner, and then in the middle you have policies and procedures, state laws, and federal laws. So while the field training program is not a singular siloed entity, it does connect, so it reaches back to the learning domains.
Okay. And you mentioned, I think, about 20 out of the 42 learning domains you think intersect some way with the
Yeah.
profiling?
So many times in the academy, when students are presented with things, they think it has a singular effect, or it's, like I said, it's siloed in the academic sense, which is not true. When you look at LD1, which is leadership, professionalism, and ethics, there's a direct correlation with how we treat people, what do we expect, and what the laws demand. When you look at principal police and victimology, property crimes, personal crimes, laws of arrest, search and seizure, there's all a tie-in to performance and expectation of following the laws.
Mhm. I think, yeah, thank you for that, because I think we've raised that as well too in this space.
Yeah.
And I think it would be great to know from your perspective which of those are the ones that you feel intersect, so that we can have a sense of
Yeah.
where that intersection is, if you want to share that with the DOJ
Yeah.
leader.
Okay. Yeah, I can do
That'd
that. Would you like me to give it to you now, or just on the sidebar?
Yeah, sidebar, this is fine.
Okay.
Unless other members of the committee want to discuss it
Yeah.
now. But otherwise we can just have that before we can discuss in a future meeting. And I'm just opening up for any other comments or questions from other folks.
Yes, by all means.
And then, since I don't see anyone yet, but also I'll ask, When is, or how often is the field training experience updated? Because I know with, like, for instance, the Train the Trainer,
Mhm.
there's concerns because that hadn't been updated to reflect the changes in the law with respect to
Yeah.
profiling. And so when has this been updated to reflect that, and kind of how is that incorporated?
Yes, ma'am. And for the group, so again, it's before, I know a lot of this doesn't mean stuff in the big picture, but I'm assigned to the Basic Training Bureau. And what that means is I work in the side of the building that handles anything to where trainees and students come in the front door. So all the initial training they're presenting is handled within my bureau. The purpose for that is because the field training, again, is a part 2 of the academy. So I'm embedded with the people that have the development of, say, for example, every April and October is usually when we present new learning material for the academies, and in other words, through testing and training specifications. So you can go on the POST website and you'll see what the current information was, what the change was, and there usually be some type of information that'll share as to what was the driving force, whether it be at law, best practices, or whatever to stimulate the change. So when that happens, obviously, because I'm there, I always take the TTS and we have meetings. And then what I can do, the way the volume 1, the academic model is set up, it doesn't require change all the time. It's really generic in the sense that we highlight the golden nuggets, if you will, of what's important. Volume 2 is more applicable to change because that's where we get the validation portion. So since the last 5 years that I've been in this position, when there's a training and testing change, all I have to do is go into part 2 of the field training program and either add, modify, delete, or just in most cases, keep increasing the amount of sign-off portions that there are to validate training. So to answer your question, I'm sorry, it's ongoing and it's continuously ongoing, which it should be, because in the Basic Training Bureau, we're never really stagnant. We're always waiting on April and October because the commission changes occur within the middle, and that's when they go out for approval from the commission. We go for public comment, and then we come back and we prepare for OAL packages, which is Office of Administrative Law.
So is it possible to get a sense of, so I totally agree with you in terms of what you're talking about with the trainings and the infield piece being where a lot of this rubber hits the road and where the new things actually come into play. I think specifically though for the racial identity profiling, that what expanded the definition, that kind of created a California standard that was higher than federal law, which is REN, which I've seen incorporated in a lot of the trainings as kind of what the actual base is. And so to me, that goes to the academic model as you're describing, as to in terms of what is even defined as profiling per the law and what actions are profiling. And the reason I keep coming back to this too is, one, I think it's important just to know if you can share a bit about when and if that has been updated to reflect. But as just an advocate and engaging with police agencies, I know that the chiefs and the trainers and whatnot are still relying on the prior definition of the law when they talk about whether or not profiling has occurred in their agencies. And so I'm very concerned that this is not actually trickling down and into the training that the officers receive, particularly if they already went through training before the law changed, and also maybe not even getting reflected in the agency level policies either. Which then obviously limits the ability to discipline if violations occur and train appropriately. So that's why I'm trying to understand kind of where that change is incorporated.
No, I understand, because that's very important. One of the biggest issues you have to admit at Post is we do a lot of work, and some of our what's problematic is communication and getting it filtered down from the very biggest agency to some of the smallest. Not only disseminated, but disseminated in the sense of what academic value or change we're trying to push down. And then so that's where the communication comes in. I can only speak to the basic training side. We do have in our Training Program Services Bureau, that's where all the in-service training is done. So any cultural diversity, racial profiling, classes, along with their continuing professional training credits, would be located within that bureau. Those courses are approved in our Training Delivery Compliance Bureau. So again, I don't want to like per se pass the buck, but I have to stay within my wheelhouse of where, I work at. All I can say this, it's from my perspective, some of the challenges that we're working with right now as far as disseminating information is we have some regulations that are somewhat archaic that we're working to change to make sure that we have the ability, and I say ability, regulatory authority to go in and make sure people update their programs more regularly. At present, some of the language is very vague, and we're looking to clean that up very soon to where we can go in and do that. But that is always a challenge, dissemination of information. And I hate to say this, but it does come back to the departments. We're a regulatory agency by, our infrastructure, but we do have to, occasionally push back on the departments, when information's been disseminated and it's been made public and it becomes a law, it becomes the responsibility of the given department to adhere to the regulation. And not only that, adhere to it to the way Post sets the standard.
Is it, so I know that we have explicitly looked at LD 42, but is there,
Yes, ma'am.
to the extent the definition of profiling is incorporated into the volume 1 in any way that is not reflected in LD 42? Can you share that with us just so that we see what
Yes,
we're
ma'am.
working with?
Yeah,
now
so
currently?
again, so I'll try to, let me try to explain this in the world. So volume 1 is very, like I said, it's written to be very vague. It's written for the biggest department, like CHP, Los Angeles Sheriff's, Los Angeles PD, and then down to departments that have 3 or 4 people. So in 2014 was when the big shift came for field training program. Prior to that, prior to 2014, we were working off models that were integrated into the police training system from the late 70s and early 80s. So and I don't want to get too much, but it kind of gets to a point, is from the 70s and 80s up until about the early 2000s, it really didn't change a lot. In the early 2000s, that's where the conceptual idea of adult learning started to come into play. The academies were starting to stretch away from the lecturette format to more of a problem-based learning application. So there was like a small paradigm shift that was occurring. And in 2001 to about 2003, for those who don't know, there was a spinoff of the field training program that became the police training program. It's often referred to as the Reno model, which is more academically entwined within the program. It's a lot more journaling. It's a lot more problem solving explanation versus taking, clear, concise written test. So example, instead of taking a test on penal codes and vehicle codes, they would have the trainees go in and explain to like a mock board, or in some cases a real board, some of the challenges they were presented during training and what the actual nexus was back to the law and how they could problem solve that issue completely out. The police training model didn't really take upon, it didn't really catch. It was just too encompassing. So that led to around 2011 and 12, both models basically got pushed together. And so that's where we're at now, is we're not really working off a Houston model, Reno model, San Jose model, or anything like that. Since around 2014, that's when we've been working off what we describe as the Post model, the best method for the state of California as we see it right now. Now, since 2014, it's undergone probably 3 or 4 revisions, and those are big topic items. Now, I'm gonna go back to your original point about Volume 1. Volume 1 is, as an agency, what does the field training program look like? Where does it come from? What is it trying to do to continue the learning process and to set someone up for success from the academy? And then it has basic forms to support the entire program. And it has what we call the standardized evaluation guidelines, which create the rating sheet that trainers use to evaluate people. And that's constantly being updated. And that's it. So there is nothing below the surface or in the weeds in volume 1, because that's really not a place for it. It's a place where people have a how-to guide for how they should run their program. Now they can modify that to make it more stringent, as in, for example, federal law. We get federal laws and the state will take it and they will make it a lot more constrictive. But volume 2 is where we can take all the information that they got academically speaking in the academies, and we can vet it out and flush it out and ask questions. And hope this clarifies things. The number one thing in chapter 6.4 in the racial profiling is we need to identify the penal code. So before we start with anything, we refer to what's the law. So we refer to 13519.4. And then from there, we go on to constitutional. What is the constitutional cases that we refer to? And then we start blending everything else within the learning domains that we already have established in the academy. So I think by doing that, there's always areas or ways to improve. But again, what we're doing is let's go back to the penal code you were taught in the academy. And this is more of an informal setting. Let's talk about it and talk about it, how it's applicable to the departments, with their specific influence. So I hope I answered your question without getting too far off track, but I wanted to bring it back together.
Thank you. I think what I'm really looking for is really anything that articulates what is profiling, because that's where I've seen a lot of disconnect between what the agencies understand it to be, and even, to be honest, in some of the trainings that we saw with posts, that even the newer trainings coming out, a disconnect between the statutory definition and what is being articulated. So whether it's, like you've mentioned, a lot of different ways in which people are learning things. So whether it's this is the sheet that the evaluator uses to determine if the officer articulated it properly, whether it's, other kind of training materials that are jump off for the discussion, like you mentioned, the statutory guidelines. Is it recognizing that the statutory guideline is actually higher than the federal standard? Is it explicit? Because I think that might be getting mixed a bit. So anything that you have that articulates kind of how that information is conveyed to the officers would be great for us to look at, just so that we understand kind of where it is in this process that maybe could be tweaked so that they're getting the right information.
Sure. And like I said, it's, you would like to think you have the best information, but it's always room for improvement because things are ever changing. And of course, I can get you the entire volume 2, or I can get you just a certain section, whatever you'd like.
I think anything you would know where, because this, as you mentioned earlier, this kind of may pop up in different places, right? So wherever it is that you feel like it's relevant to how they're being trained on the definition of profiling and what acts they can take, to initiate a stop and to conduct the stop, because that's where it usually falls down. I think when I talk to folks at agencies, is that they don't recognize that the actions that they take after the stop are matter to the definition of profiling, are incorporated in that, and that it's race identity along with anything else is the basis for stop that can be profiling, even if they do have a legitimate basis for the stop. If they're using race or other identity characteristics to decide to stop, that it's not. So figuring any place that articulates those kind of rationales, that'd be great.
I'll get that to you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I know it's convoluted and complicated, and I appreciate you taking time to walk us through it and providing more of the information that we can look at to see kind of what's going on. I know I took a lot of your time. Does anyone else on the committee have any questions for Mr.?
No questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you very much.
So we can continue let's circle back, because I saw that member Sierra is here and she can do her, if she's still here. I know that was a long discussion, but yes, great. Thank you, Angela.
Good morning. Great, can you hear me? Okay, terrific. So, well, good morning to everybody, and thank you. So I just wanted to report out on when I appeared, I had the opportunity to attend the last post meeting that took place in person in Anaheim on March 22nd. And on behalf of the board and the subcommittee, I was able to present during public comment regarding our last annual report. And during that public comment, I just wanted to kind of give you an overview of what I spoke about, because as I understand it, Post has invited and is working with our board to have a more full presentation to Post. But during the 5-minute public comment that I was able to do, I took that opportunity to first just remind all the board, the Post commission members about our advisory board and when we were created, how we are made up of 19 members from all different walks of life, and our mission as a board, and in particular, our mission with respect to our mandate to review and analyze post law enforcement training courses and how they impact the racial and identity stop data outcomes. And urging during my public comment, I urged the commission to take a close look at our annual report and to consider our recommendations. I was able within the 5 minutes to talk a little bit more specifically about some of our recommendations. I did note that so far we've reviewed 7 post courses on racial and identity profiling, and also underscored why our collaboration between our board and Post is so important. And, to provide context for a recommendation, I did note that our annual RIPA data is continuing to suggest that the current trainings are not as effective as they could be at combating racial and identity profiling. And I noted in my comments that we are seeing, the disparities we're seeing, and particularly toward those who are perceived as Black, because those are persisting. And also noted in my comments that, so far, well, for the 2021 calendar year, that we collected and reported stop data from 58 law enforcement agencies, including the 23 largest. And Melanie, as you noted, I also underscored that we're seeing the disparities at multiple steps of the law enforcement contact, including the actions taken during the stop and the outcome of the stop. So it's not only just the stop itself. The sampling of the recommendations that I spoke about during just that 5-minute public comment period is that more generally, we are urging Post to discuss our board's feedback at its commission meetings and discuss our best practice recommendations and actually have it as an item for discussion by the commission. I also noted that we're recommending that Post develop a robust plan for engaging individuals from the communities most profiling in reviewing and providing feedback on existing Post courses, as well as the new ones in development. And then finally, one other recommendation that I underscored was that our board believes that courses should contain measures of effectiveness by which to evaluate course outcomes, such as reduction in disparities in traffic stops, or how many, for example, how many students taking these courses pass or fail the course. I concluded by letting all the members know where they can find our report and recommendations. I believe they've all been sent the report, but just so that they know, in addition, that they can go on our website to find a report, our executive summary, our quick facts, our best practices and recommendations. I also provided noted that they could contact our co-chairs or board members, or in addition, DOJ staff, including Ellison Elgart, if they want to contact the board to continue collaborating on any particular matter. So I, and I ended, with just underscoring that, we look forward to continued dialogue with Post. And, we really want to work together to make sure that those training courses can be a more effective tool for officers and for the public. And so that was the extent of my public comment. Again, there was only 5 minutes for public comment. The commission members, there were no questions from the commission members, but I do want to note that Post Commission Chair Geoff Long, he did urge the commission to review a report, and he did note that he'd be very happy to have our commission make a presentation at one of its future meetings. So I don't know if anybody has any questions.
Great. Thank you so much for doing that, Angela. That was a wonderful overview, and it really actually very much mirrors the draft section of this this year's report as well. So we appreciate you hitting all those really key points.
Great.
Any questions from anyone
You're
else or
welcome.
comments from the board? Manju said thank you for the update in her
Okay.
chat. So
Yeah,
You're very
it was,
welcome. Thank you.
I think it was important to reiterate that with all of the conversation, the results are still the same. There's still disparities.
Yeah.
So thank you for doing that.
You're very welcome.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
So
Very nice to
Let-
see everybody.
So let's go ahead and move to the discussion of the report. And I think someone from DOJ was going to just give a quick overview of the draft that hopefully folks have had a chance to read, and we can comment on more on that.
Sophia, oh, great, okay.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Apologies, having some technical difficulties here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'll just give a quick overview of the draft that was circulated. To start off with, the draft includes an overview of the kind of general issues with the feedback, and recognizes that the board has expressed that there is some difficulty in understanding when the board's recommendations are incorporated into the post courses and curriculum. Additionally, the draft focuses on understanding how there can be a structured feedback mechanism for both the board and the community, as well as additional built-in systems and coordination. And this stems from the issue that to date, the board has been unable to confirm whether the board's feedback or the feedback of their suggested subject matter experts were considered or incorporated in either MOT or dispatch training updates, and that there hasn't been a way to set up a regular feedback process with posts during the course development and update process. So I'll just run through the 5 recommendations in the draft quickly, and then I'll turn it over to you if you have any questions. So the first is that posts adopt protocols and publish separate training guidelines independent of the curriculum, and that's tied directly to the statutory mandate that the board be included in the development and revision of these courses. The second recommendation was to propose an integrated timeline for the board and community review of curriculum. And the sort of 3 prongs that may be something the board would think about is how to consider when subject matter expert calls can go out ahead of time so that there's enough time to have a diverse call for subject matter experts ahead of the kind of scheduling of the review process. The second is how to think through how the board and the community's engagement and review of the publication and review of the draft can be built in where there's sufficient time to hold a subcommittee meeting or some sort of review to understand the revision before it's finalized. And the third prong is to understand how the board's feedback is or is not incorporated in the training, and how the subject matter experts, what that call, the results of that call looked like, that call for subject matter experts, who was chosen as subject matter expert, what's their background, who was not, kind of more of a transparency angle there, so that the broader community understands the timeline for these training updates, the process for how they can be involved, and set the schedule set so that there's time for enough feedback. The third recommendation is to ensure there's community and stakeholder input on how to improve trainings. We know that community engagement, in past reports, the board has explained how community engagement can close existing knowledge gaps. The draft goes over how this recommendation has also been shared by the Little Hoover Commission, who has recommended that POST widen its scope of researchers and partner with researchers to develop new curriculum that addresses knowledge gaps. And that would include additional public members from vulnerable communities, mental health professionals who serve vulnerable communities, and experts in adult education and scientific research. The fourth recommendation is to measure course effectiveness of all post-racial and identity profiling courses. So that's been discussed already, but the draft notes that given the long-term disparities demonstrated by the RIPA data, that the board has recommended that POST measure the effectiveness of the trainings. Other entities have further supported the call to measure effectiveness based on results and behavior change, such as a reduction in racial profiling, instead of perceptive changes like survey results. In the 2023 RIPA report, the board recommended that as MOT and POST update their course, that measures of effectiveness must be included. Again, other state agencies have called for measuring effectiveness. The Little Hoover Commission and the California State Auditor raised concerns that POST trainings have not changed officer behavior. The fifth and final recommendation is incorporating accountability as a required topic in the racial and things. So that, just to briefly go over this, the draft explains how RIPA added a legal obligation for POST course of instruction to include specific obligations of peace officers in preventing, reporting, and responding to discriminatory or biased practices by fellow peace officers. So the board advocated to add accountability of the topic, first in the 2020 report. The board recommended course objectives that would prominently discuss and emphasize law enforcement agency expectations regarding unlawful racial or identity profiling behavior and accountability for engaging in those acts. Further, the state auditor has called for the legislature to require officers to receive training at least biannually on reporting obligations and how officers should respond in real time after observing biased behavior by their peers. So to summarize this last point, the draft explains how the board recommends post-training development include that topic of accountability generally, but specifically of how officers are accountable to each other. This has been an important topic of interest in the subject of police reform for decades, following longstanding reports of retaliation against officers who've reported bias and profiling. You'll notice that the draft, it's as longstanding as the Christopher report. That is a summary of what the draft provides, and I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much. Oh, sorry, I thought I was muted the whole time. Thank you so much. And I don't know if anyone has any initial questions for Sophia, or we can jump into any comments that folks have. This is our time to discuss the substance of the report or any comments on the proposed draft that was circulated.
I just like the section, well, I like the report, but I really appreciate the section where we have to put in some different measures to address the real issues. And so we got to measure how officers are changing so that we have a different outcome with the stop data. So that's a good piece in there.
Thank you, Pastor Kennedy. I also thought this was a great draft. I have some smaller comments that I'll send, as I typically do, some just comments to DOJ for the next round. But so I guess a few kind of bigger things that I could just put out there and invite other board members to comment on these is kind of what I raised when I was speaking to Mr. Crowder about the divergence between what is the actual definition of profiling and what kind of officers seemingly have been trained to understand as a definition. I really think that is really something that I want to emphasize as much as possible in this report. That's, I think, the crux of a lot of what's happening here, that in terms of continuing to see these disparities, is that no one has ever told officers that that's wrong, that like searching a Black person after they've been stopped is actually part of profiling. Agencies don't have policies that identify that that's profiling, so the officers can't be disciplined even if they engage in these things. So of course it's going to continue because there's no mechanism to either train or enforce that this is incorrect. And I think that needs to be highlighted more. I've tried in the past on the policy subcommittee to have some evaluation of agency policies and whether they actually reflected what the law currently is. And I know that was like rejected as an approach, but I think that this is something that's crucial. We can't expect that profiling stops or is reduced if we're not teaching them what profiling is and that it's illegal. So I think really emphasizing that mismatch is crucial. Some of the other bigger comments, let me just pull up my notes. Hold on one second.
Yes, and once that's in, the discipline or the accountability has to be very has to be significant, has to be immediate to correct behavior. So I agree with you. I do have a question. How do we put more teeth into our recommendations to post? I mean, how do we get posts to implement, to take these recommendations serious and implement?
I don't know if anyone else has other suggestions, but I think one thing, which is partly why I want to understand what the actual training is currently saying, because we know that the Train the Trainer did not have the currently accurate definition of profiling for the past like 7 years. So understanding the mismatch between what the legislature has directed the definition to be and has directed posts to train on and what is being trained, I think hopefully, clearly articulating that might push posts to take that on themselves to make sure that in every iteration it's consistent with the law, if that's not already the case. And hopefully also provide a basis for folks to take action to try to reconcile those things, if it's not just voluntarily addressed by post, hopefully. And one additional thing on the accountability piece, bias is also, I don't know the exact definition, but I think it might conform with what we have in the profiling definition, is considered serious misconduct for purposes of decertification. I think that's a piece that can be also added in the accountability. It's not just do it because it's the right thing, it's also actively against the law and can be basis for you to lose your ability to be a peace officer in the future if it's adjudicated. So I think that's an important accountability measure potentially if it's being enforced. Pastor Kennedy, we're going to say something else? And in addition, another kind of more substantial comment is when we're talking about page 3, when we're talking about the guidelines, and I actually have some questions about the guidelines that hopefully Post can answer, but when we're making suggestions as to what we think should be in there, I think one of the early things that should be mentioned is a discussion of the ineffectiveness of profiling, which can rely in RIPA data to illustrate the infrequency with which minor stops result in arrests for more serious offenses, or the rarity of discovering weapons or other serious contraband, and the higher yield rate for searches of white individuals versus Black and Latino individuals, who are the ones more frequently subject to discretionary searches, among other things that we can pull out from the RIPA data. I thought when I've seen the training on profiling, the tone that it often struck was, it's fine to profile, it's good to profile, but you can't do it because of these laws or these rules, or they limit it. But all the data that we've seen is that profiling is not an effective policing tool in the first place. And I think moving people from that state of mind, I think is also going to be helpful. So it's not them trying to find ways to work around the rules because they want to be able to use this effective policing tool, but actually recognizing that that tool is wasting your time and harming, community relations. I think that's where we should actually be grounding all of the training on profiling, because I think that is a mental shift that officers often need to take. I saw Manju's.
Yeah,
Oh,
no,
go ahead,
I was
Manju.
just going to add that I think that is a very, very important piece of this. And I think it has to be sort of foundational in the training, because otherwise you're completely right that they think it's necessary, it's important, it's effective. And so they're going to keep on doing it. And they're going to buck the trainings if they think it's effective, but then they're being told not to do it, right? So I think in order for all parts of the post trainings to be effective, this is going to be a key piece. And I think in other arenas of civil rights, we've seen the same thing, is that when you present information about how ineffective it actually is, I think that becomes more compelling than just saying it's morally not good or it violates certain laws, to show that you actually are missing key data and information in law enforcement when you use it as a shortcut for investigations.
I think that certainly moves to pretext stops and eliminating those as well, because they don't produce the results either that they're looking for, and focus more on criminal behavior and go after what is clearly criminal behavior, and not waste our time, officers not waste time harassing Black and brown people. Because that really is the bottom line. It's just harassment.
Thank you both. I think those were my main questions, but I think one thing that is, and hopefully someone from Post, I don't know who's the better person, Megan or Stephen, to answer this question, but we were a little bit unclear on the status of the guidelines and kind of where that falls. Especially, I know, Stephen, when you were giving that overview, you mentioned the term guidelines, but then when you were going more in depth, I'm not sure if we're defining them the same or thinking of the same thing. But with respect to the guidelines that the statute directs Post to create, we know that for some other areas like use of force, hate crimes, elder abuse, there's a separate guideline document that is separate from the training. And we just want to understand, just so we know one way or the other, is that true for the profiling as well, or is that not the case?
Hi, it's Megan Paulus again. So I think that I know there's been some discussions with DOJ. There's guidelines can go either way. They can be a separate document or they can be incorporated into the training. From what we've understood from doing research, because unfortunately, when this law was enacted, nobody that is currently in leadership at Post was here. So we don't have that historical context as to why the commission went the direction that they did. But from doing research, we found that the commission deemed the portion of the guidelines in accordance to the law was incorporated into the training. So there is no separate document.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I think it'd be helpful now to have like maybe a step back even further for me to better understand like what is a guideline, like the like term, it's a term of art, right? So like what is it supposed to entail so that we can understand like how that's incorporated into the training.
I don't know if I'm the best person to really speak to that high of a level for Post. I just know that it just kind of falls to the interpretation of when the training is developed versus how they want to incorporate that. And I think what's difficult for this particular situation is because right now, currently Post, when we are mandated to create guidelines, we are creating those separate documents. But I think it's difficult for this particular situation because that was a decision that was made prior to this current administration. So I don't know what those discussions were as to like why they chose to do that. And I just know that for right now, we're treating them as separate kind of going forward, but it just depends largely on what the commission wants to do when we're mandated to do those different things.
So I guess maybe even more, rather like separating it from the decision to combine them or not, what kind of purpose does the guideline serve versus what purpose does, like separate from the training? Because it's a repeated thing that comes up in the case, in the statutes and whatnot. So just trying to understand what is conceptually the difference between the two.
So speaking to just more recent guidelines we've developed and along the lines of hate crimes and as well as use of force, we were specifically directed to create those so that agencies could develop their policies. Post does not develop policy, so the guidelines are kind of based on the law, what should be in those policies. So for use of force specifically, we created those guidelines to be used as policy development. What should agencies be considering and be doing in their policies? The same with hate crimes. That is a draft model policy, but they are essentially guidelines as to what the law states that agencies have to include in their policies.
So thank you. That actually helps a little bit to maybe parse out the difference between the two. And I guess in at least just looking at kind of the trainings for profiling that the board or commission believes like incorporate the guidelines, how is that training different from like the training from use of force? Like, doesn't that also contain the law, or how are they different if there's a difference in terms of how the information is presented?
So for use of force, I do know that those guidelines that were produced are incorporated into the training. And vice versa, there's some of the training that's incorporated into the guidelines, if that makes sense. They kind of go hand in hand.
And so I know the initial determination is kind of lost to the sands of time as to why, but it given the concern about it, is there and the kind of change in the way Post is approaching the creation of guidelines now, is there a reason why Post hasn't decided to just extract those so that we have a separate set of guidelines as well?
It's been a discussion, but really it's up to the commission on what direction they want to take.
Okay, Thank you. So that's my questions on the guidelines. I don't know if DOJ has any other questions so they can understand anything, but I think that touches on the main points that we needed to better understand. If you took a look at the draft report, I'm not sure if you have, there's we're attempting to come up with recommendations on kind of a timeline that allows for the incorporation of public feedback and development of or cultivation of a wider range of subject matter experts. And I know when we talked about creation of new trainings or updating trainings, a lot of things vary from subject to subject, year to year in terms of what that looks like. But just so that we are able to create a recommendation that that comports with the reality of what Post is doing, can you give us a sense of the existing realistic timeline? Is an update take at least a year, or is an update take at least 3 months? Like, if you give us a sense of kind of what the kind of minimum requirements are in terms of moving that work forward, so that we can make sure to keep that in mind with whatever we recommend.
I think that that's where kind of the difficulty becomes in developing timelines. It's been an ongoing discussion between Post and this entity for years, at least since I've been at Post. And I really think it just kind of goes down to the fluidity of some of the different programs. Post has over 4,000 courses that are certified. So it really largely depends on what program is being updated. So I think that we've really tried to communicate that often, like developing these timelines and having those kind of structured times is difficult because not every course is going to be updated every year. So I think it's difficult. Like we hear you all. We do our best. I know that at least I strongly feel that in the last several years, like we've really done our due diligence in reaching out to this entity in particular to solicit feedback. And I know that we're really working on making sure that the group is aware of the feedback that has been incorporated. That is something that we have really been working on.
Thank you, Megan. I don't know if anyone else has any either questions for Megan or other comments or suggestions on the proposed draft. Ronnie, I know you're coming in on phone. Can you, I don't know if I want to make sure that you have a chance to say anything if you had anything you wanted to add.
I don't have any comments. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, well, thank you, Megan, very
Sure.
much.
Of course.
Okay, so I think
Charlotte, sorry, I wanted to jump in really quickly and just while we have Megan here, did she drop off?
I think she's still on.
Oh,
I'm here.
Sorry. I had a little bit of a lag with unmuting. I just wanted to jump in and see, and I'll pose this as a question to the Post subcommittee, but I think having Megan online would be helpful in case there's any follow-up. But, you know, our prior overview of sort of what an ideal timeline for Post review of course updates and revisions, we talked about 3 specific entry points. The first is a broader call for subject matter experts ahead of the timeline. The second is that there would be a specific structured time for Post feedback and review of the material before it's finalized, so that there is time for edits, or that there is time perhaps for a second call for subject matter experts. There is time for community engagement. And then the third piece is that there would be sort of a report out of what feedback was accepted, what was not, what subject matters experts were included, who was not, and that would kind of give it, and that'd be memorialized either in a letter or some other transparent way, and that would give kind of the community and Post a way to see how, the community and the board to see how their specific feedback was integrated or not. And so I wanted to just take this time while we're all on this call to just run through a proposed timeline. And this is just still ideas, drafts, and I just wanted to get the subcommittee's feedback, given what we just heard on kind of the fluidity of these training processes. What do you want to see as an ideal time frame, an ideal timeline for the report and for understanding how the community can be better engaged and how the board can be engaged in feedback and during the update and revision process as mandated by law. So I'm just going to run through it quickly and then turn it to the subcommittee to see if they have any feedback. And at that time, perhaps the subcommittee may have follow-up questions for post. So, we don't have any timelines on how long the course revision process is. We understand that it's a fluid process and each course revision is an individual process. So we're thinking maybe we could start with a assumption that the course update would run about a year long. So the first kind of idea we want to throw out there is that 90 days prior to the update process, before setting a public timeline, POST would consult with the RIPA board on the specific topic of the upcoming training course development and provide the current version of training materials, a summary of the subject matter, so that POST can assist in seeking a diverse set of subject matter experts and engage community feedback on goals for this topic. At that time, POST would be able to finalize a timeline for review and publish that timeline and call for subject matter experts for public awareness and to maximize the pool of relevant subject matter experts. About 1 to 2 months in, POST would notify the RIPA board of proposed subject matter expert groups, schedule dates, and publish dates for subject matter experts and community engagement meetings to review the draft. 2 to 3 months, the RIPA board and subject matter expert groups could meet to review the draft course curriculum and provide feedback. So that's the second prong, that built-in feedback mechanism. POST would be able to consult with subject matter experts, community groups, the RIPA board to review the draft before finalization and to ensure that additional data or perspectives are added. About 6 months, POST would consult with the RIPA board to present a final draft and give updates on subject matter feedback. That would present an opportunity for a second call for subject matter experts if needed. During the finalization process, which we could assume, we don't have a structure, so we can assume 7 to 10 months, the board would be presented a draft 60 days before publication with sufficient time to hold a meeting to discuss the new draft, review community feedback, and draft final recommendations to POST. And 11 months to deadline, POST would memorialize in a letter to the board how that feedback from the board, from community organizations, from subject matter experts was or was not incorporated in the training. And it would also include which subject matter experts were included in the process and who was not. These are just general ideas to get the conversation started. I'll turn it back over to the co-chair.
Great. Thank you, Sophia. Definitely happy to hear other folks' responses to that. My initial response, given what Megan just said about the variation, I think that it might make more sense rather than give a full timeline to give a window for each step. So whatever we think 60 days before X occurs, POST do this because we think 60 days is enough time for the board and the public to do whatever it is that they need to do in response so that POST can do it. So whether that happens at month 4 or whether it happens at month 12, because we don't know the kind of timeline for the actual completion, it may make more sense to give all those points that you mentioned, like all the different interaction points, and then just an amount of time that we think it's necessary to actually complete that and what it should proceed, so that it can be more flexible into the actual creation of the report. I'm sorry, the training. That's my initial response. That may be a little more flexible given what Megan said about the existing practice, but I'm happy to hear what other folks think.
This is the way we've done things have been done so long, and the culture is deeply entrenched in its way of doing things and the way they think about things. It's going to take a lot of time to update the curriculum properly and get change behavior. It's going to take time. And so it will take time to update curriculum properly. And so if we're really serious about this, then we should really invest the time to do processes that give us better curriculum and better outcomes. It's going to take time. And so if Post is really serious about changing the outcomes, it's just, for me, I'm in the community. It's heart-wrenching for me to talk to teenagers who are riding their bikes and they come to me and talk to me about how the police pulled them over. They're just trying to, they already have a hard time riding through the neighborhood safely, but to have to explain why they're riding their bikes, where they're going, just because they're being kids, that's really hard. And we have to change the relationship we have with the teenagers, the younger ones, because we're not going to have a serious police force in the future if we're giving them negative images. Who wants to go into that career? We're already having a hard time recruiting police officers all over the country. And so Pulse has got to look toward the future of this profession, and we're going to have to work together. When agencies don't work together, we get a 9/11 disaster. And we just have to change the way we're doing business. We have to be willing to change the way we're doing business and interact with one another. It's not popular and it's going to be hard work, but we have to be willing to do it.
Thank you, Pastor Kennedy. I want to make sure that we have time for public comment because we're nearing our end. So let's go ahead and just move to public comment, and we'll take starting from NorCal. Is there anyone who would like to give a comment? You could also raise your hand or just jump in. Okay. If no one from Northern California, how about Central California? Okay, and Southern California, Michelle, would you like to jump in?
Great, thank you. Yeah, Michelle Wittig from the Santa Monica Coalition for Police Reform. Thanks to everybody for a very informative meeting. Seems like the topic today has been the relationship between the RIPA board, the post training, and the practice on the ground. And the RIPA board is concerned with how it can be more influential in updating the post training and ensuring that the practice on the ground reflects the law. So I'd like to just speak up in favor of having the RIPA board also support and empower non-governmental organizations like my own, the grassroots, so to speak, which is tasked basically with putting pressure on its local police chief and or its local police commission, if it has one, to update those training standards and put those into practice on the ground. I'm particularly concerned with smaller cities like ours, but those that are much less resourced than ours, which sent their data on stops to the DOJ as of April 1st, 2023. Our small cities were mandated to do that based on 2022 stop data. We've gotten tremendous pushback from our local police union that doesn't even want to talk to the police commission about changing anything with respect to stops. Furthermore, we're still waiting for our police department to publish those data that were sent to the DOJ on April 1st. Now, we are a very well-resourced city, so I'm not going to campaign for us, but I know of hundreds of other less wealthy, small communities with their own police departments that need help desperately to get those data out to the public, help them interpret it, and then use it to put pressure on their police department to change their policies accordingly. This is exactly what Pastor Kennedy basically is saying. We have to get the under-resourced communities empowered with the data that we already have so that they can use it on the ground. So that's another way to make sure that practice reflects the legal structure. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Michelle. Any other public comments from Southern California, or you can, if I missed you, anywhere in California? Great, thank you. In terms of next steps, I think we're going to hear back a few things from Mr. Crawford regarding the different learning domains that intersect with profiling, as well as examples in the existing trainings that articulate the standard of what is, or definition of what is profiling, and the various ways that that can be identified through the material. And I think those are the only things. The one thing that comes to mind from our discussion, and the fact that Megan mentioned that the commission has considered, or Post internally has considered, creating additional guidelines, or separate guidelines, I should say, for profiling. I know that there's a June meeting upcoming for Post, and I don't know if there's a way that we can make that recommendation or request to the Post Commission that they consider doing that, since Megan mentioned that that is a decision that comes from the commission. So I don't know if Megan's still on. I think I see her. Is there a way that we can transmit that, or maybe the DOJ better would answer this question, transmit that request to the commission to consider?
I don't know if Allison wants to answer that, or
Yeah,
if you want me
sorry.
to.
No, it was taking me a little bit to actually, for some reason, my camera wasn't unmuting itself. So I think, we will have Chair Vieta present at that meeting. I think in order to have it be a formal recommendation of the board, you all would have to vote on it. And then you would have to bring it to the full board on June 28th as a full board recommendation before it can become, a full recommendation. But I think there's probably a way, if you all, if that's something that you all want to vote on now, we could bring it as a recommendation to the full board on June 28th. And it could be something perhaps that Chair Vieta could mention that the full board will vote on that as a recommendation, or will consider that as a recommendation. But if you all wanted to have a formal vote on that now, then we can move that recommendation to the full board on June 28th at our next meeting.
Sure, I think let's go ahead and do that. So I move to make the recommendation from the board to Post to promulgate separate guidelines related to profiling per the statute. Do I have a second?
Second.
Great, thank you. We can vote. I vote aye.
Frank Kennedy, aye.
Manju Kulkarni, aye.
Ronaldo Villeda, aye.
Great, thank you. That passes. So we will discuss that or bring that before the full board at our next meeting. I assume that I don't know the date actually of the Post meeting. Is that oh yes, that's prior. You said that, Ronnie Vieta. So hopefully, Ronnie, you can mention that we passed that through the subcommittee, and it will be up for vote in our June 28th meeting, but that these committee members have repeatedly, expressed concern for the need for separate guidelines that are explicit and provide better guidance to local agencies to ensure that their own policies conform with the current law. So thank you all very much. If there's no other final points or questions from any board members or the DOJ, I think we can adjourn on time. Anything else?
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Great
you.
meeting.
Very welcome. Thank you.